Lauren and I started our floor project by unloading the full trailer into the house. We checked the moisture content, and it was okay. We wanted to stage the wood inside to make sure it was acclimated to our house. We then carried it out to the garage in small batches to be cut down on the table saw and then put through the router. We started with about 1,400 square feet of pine floorboards, ranging in length from 3 to 14 feet, and on average 5 inches wide, some boards as wide as 9. So it originally took up all 3 bedrooms of the house.
So what I've got here is I've got one of the original boards. So we bought this pine, and it came out of an old building, and so it has the original groove and the original tongue in it, and in a small percentage of the cases the boards are in good enough shape to reuse, but the majority of them aren't. So what we decided after talking about it for a little bit was just to go ahead and come out here and cut the tongue and groove off of every single board, and go ahead and put new tongue and grooves on them. It's going to be a ton of work, but it'll also make the floor look great when it's all said and done. The first thing we got to do is we got to go pick through the boards. We got to make sure they don't have serious cracks down them, because if they do, then we'll put them aside. Try to find something cool to do with them later. We'll have to cut more off, so that we want to have the same width for all the boards we're going to use for the flooring. We've got some super wide boards that I'm going to set aside because I think that's cool, and I'm going to see what we can do with those at some point. Then after we kind of pick through them and make sure they're not cracked, we got to look for old cleats and staples that are still in the boards. Most of them, they did a really good job of pulling all that out, but you know, here's a stray one here, and there's going to be some more, and so the last thing we want to do is put that through the table saw. If it goes to the table saw, we're going to screw our blade up, and then we're not going to get good cuts. So this is one that I've already done just as an example. I've got the tongue and groove off both sides, and then what we'll do when we're done here is I'll go ahead and set the router up after we've done all the boards, and then we'll reroute a new tongue and groove on either side. And originally these boards, for some reason, I guess this is common with pine from what I've read, is they did not have a tongue and groove on the ends. If you buy hardwood flooring today, you'll get a tongue and groove on all the ends, and a lot of old wood also came with it. The upside to that is that when you put an end together with an end, it'll actually lock, meaning that you don't have to glue the end of the board down. And then there's less of a chance of that becoming your weak spot where you start getting the floor to come up on you. So yeah, so we'll get started cutting. I'll cut a bunch of them, and it's going to take a long time. I don't know how many hundreds of boards we have, but it'll feel good when it's done.
Now that I'm ready to cut, I'll begin by flipping each board over to inspect it for cleats and face nails that are left behind from when it was removed. The finished width of the boards will be 3 1/4 inches, which will remove enough wood so that I don't have to worry about the majority of the old cleats, and I'll have a fresh squared edge to make a new tongue and groove. I still need to check and make sure all the cleats are standing up and pull anything that could hit the blade on my table saw. If I need to remove something, I typically rely on a pair of vice grips or lineman pliers to pull them through the board. I'll repeat this on each board until I have a large stack ready to send through the saw for the first pass. I'll work through the entire pile I've brought into the garage, and then I will reset the table saw blade and cut the opposite side. I typically cut the tongue off first, as that is where most of the cleats are. The groove side provides a more consistent square edge for a first pass, and when I send them through for a second pass, it goes much more quickly without having to worry about cleats. Finally, I'll put the boards through a router table. We bought the set from Rockler, and they held up through the thousands of feet of boards. Each board requires a total of 4 passes. 2 passes for the tongue sides and 2 passes to make the grooves. To keep the boards as consistent as possible, I ran around 1/3 of the total flooring at a time, first doing the tongue, followed by the groove. I checked the boards between batches to make sure they fit well, This part posed the biggest challenge to us. First, we were doing it on a small Bosch router table and found it impossible to get it completely flat. If I could go back and do it all over, I would spend the extra time building a flat router table with a bigger surface. The second part that was difficult was handling boards over 8 feet in length. It took a lot of force to keep them flat as they went through, and the ends required both of us so that they didn't get off the router fence as we pushed them through. This part was slow, very dusty, and it was already getting into the high 90s outside by the time we began this part of the project. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we had long since worn out our slightly more comfortable N95 respirators and had to wear these heavier P100 masks the whole time. If I learned anything from cutting all these boards, it is that you can do a lot with a little, but it would have been so much easier with a good router table, some dust collection, and a better table saw. Meanwhile, back inside our house, Lauren was busy preparing rooms so that we could put our new flooring down. She started by cutting the carpet into manageable strips that could be rolled up by using a sharp box cutter. She then cut the carpet pad under it and carried it all out. Our house had been so neglected by the previous owners that it felt great to see the musty carpet go. Once the carpet is all removed, we have to take care of the nail strips and baseboards.
Okay, so to remove these carpet strips, they're basically just these thin strips of wood with little nails sticking up to catch the carpet. And then they're just nailed into the subfloor here. So we just got to get under them and pull them up. And we're just pulling it up, and no worries if it goes through, if the strip pulls through the nail, since we're just gonna come back through and pull all those up anyway. So you're just gonna continue doing this along the rest of the floor until it is all up.
The important step that follows is checking the level of the floor across the room. If it changes too much, it can cause issues with the flooring. We check and measure for gaps under the level and see if there are any high or low spots we need to address. Fortunately, there was nothing major that a couple of shingles and some sanding couldn't fix. Here I'm sanding a lip between two pieces of subfloor that didn't meet when screwed down. Our house suffered significant termite damage at some point, so when they came in to replace the original flooring, it created a lip between the perimeter of the room made up of old boards and the new subfloor. We ended up having to sand the entire perimeter, and there were some additional steps like a load-bearing wall somebody had forgotten to support that we had to deal with here. But after being sidetracked, we ended up getting the floor where we finally needed it to be, and we were ready to move on to putting down the moisture barrier. While you watch Lauren begin to roll out the 30-pound roofing felt paper that served as our moisture barrier, I want to take a second to recommend Pete's Hardwood Flooring from St. Paul, Minnesota. Their website is an incredible resource for DIYers looking to install and refinish their own hardwood floors, and I don't think we could have done this without the help of Katie and all the knowledge they have compiled. I was able to pay for a phone consultation, and I'll put their info in a link down below. If you're considering tackling even a fraction of this project, head on over there. If anyone in the DIY hardwood flooring world deserves your business, I think it's them. Lauren rolled out this roofing felt with a 4-inch overlap, stapling it down as she went. It prevents moisture from the crawl space below from penetrating and causing issues with our hardwood flooring as the weather changes. From everything we learned, the preparation before floorboards start to be installed is critical if you want your hardwood floors to look good for generations. And if you've stuck with us this far, the good news is we're actually about to start putting in some floorboards. In order to leave a gap that allows the floorboards to expand, we measured a 1/2 inch off the wall at each corner on the wall we wanted to start from. We marked our points and then snapped a chalk line so that the flooring would be straight as it crossed the room. This accounts for the possibility that the walls are out of square. Our living and dining room proved to be a little tricky as we had this divider, but our chalk lines had worked well in our other rooms, so we hoped the difference would be minor and started putting down the floor. We began our first row along the chalk line we had just snapped, and although the cleat nailer will handle most of the work, the first few rows must be face nailed and glued down. This is because the cleat nailer can't get close to the wall for the first rows in the beginning and the end of the room. We used PL 400 subfloor adhesive and liberal face nailing with a 16 gauge nailer until the third row. Adhesive and face nails are better than nothing, but they're no match for a heavy swing of the flooring mallet, so take extra care when tapping in new boards for a few rows and when beginning to use the cleat nailer. Once we got away from the wall and were able to use the cleat nailer, things started going pretty smoothly. This room is around 400 square feet, so it took quite some time to make progress. We both work and we're dealing with 100 little other projects in our new home, so it took a while to get all the flooring in. We used our flooring mallet and a 2x4 to tap most of the boards in. The mallet has a metal edge that is supposed to be for tapping boards, but our experience was that it was far too harsh for the pine. It might work better on oak or harder woods, but our boards were so delicate that they dented quite easily. We even had to be careful when nailing the cleats to hit the top correctly so that it didn't leave marks on the top of the floorboard. The mallet and 2x4 allowed us to use a little more swing if the board didn't want to go together at first. We worked along right to left, trying to use whole boards and leave as little cut off at the end as possible. Lauren had saved most of the 12-foot boards for this room so that they could really shine in this open space. When we reached the end of each row, we would use a flooring jack to snug up the last board, as there is no room to tap it in. As you can see, we found it important to use a 2x4 to spread the load of the flooring jack across the studs. This might not be necessary in every home, but our drywall was in terrible shape, and we had a few studs with enough termite damage to make them all but useless. We tore out and replaced all the drywall in the rooms we put flooring in, but if you aren't going to do that, spreading the load for your flooring jack is probably a good idea. It's a lot easier than fixing holes in your drywall. We finished the last several rows in the same way we started, with face nails and adhesive. Since the room wasn't square, the last row required that we account for several things. First, the distance between the final full row and the wall was smaller as we moved left to right. Just as we left a gap for expansion on the first row, we wanted one on this side as well. So we used shorter boards and cut them down to different widths on the table saw to fit along the wall. The baseboards will cover them, so it is not important that they all be the same width, just that they all be close enough to the wall for the gaps to be hidden by the baseboards. To make the last row easier to get in so close to the wall, we cut most of the bottom part of the groove off each board on the table saw. If you don't do this, the wall can prevent you from placing your board, or you can break them trying to squeeze them in. Several months of renovation later, with new drywall throughout much of the house, we sanded and refinished the floors. They came out better than we could have hoped. We were so sucked into the project that I didn't bother to film any of it, but this is where I recommend you head over to Pete's Hardwood Floors. They were the best resource we found as complete beginners, and their guides made it possible for our floors to turn out so well. We decided to use a water-based floor finish made by Pallman, and found the rep we spoke to when we ran into a problem very helpful as well. After all this work making and installing our floors, one might think the sanding part would be a breeze, but it is hard work. We had a lot of flooring to sand. The whole process took 2.5 days of sanding with both of us working, and then the multi-coat finishing process, but it made our modest home feel considerably brighter. We hope you enjoyed this video and feel free to let us know what you think in the comments below. We'll see you next time.